He had nothing left to trust, except a dog that refused to move. The house smelled like old wood and forgotten winters, the kind of place where dust didn't just settle, it stayed, like memories no one came back for. And Daniel Hayes stood in the doorway with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, staring at a life that wasn't his, not really, just something cheap enough to afford when everything else had fallen apart. The realtor had barely looked him in the eye when handing over the keys, said something about a previous owner who passed, and no next of kin. Worth mentioning, said the dog inside wasn't part of the deal, but hadn't bothered removing it either, and now here it was, lying beside a worn-out dog bed in the corner of the living room. A German shepherd with a coat dulled by time, but eyes that still burned steady and sharp, watching him like he was the intruder, like he didn't belong, which maybe he didn't. Not here, not anywhere anymore. Daniel dropped his bag with a soft thud, boots echoing faintly against the creaking floorboards as he stepped inside. The late afternoon light slipping through half-broken blinds and casting long, tired shadows across the room. But the dog didn't move, didn't bark, didn't even flinch, just lay there with its head resting on the edge of that old bed, as if guarding something no one else could see. Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he muttered under his breath, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. The dog blinked once, slow, deliberate, then shifted its gaze, not to him, but to the floor beneath the bed, just for a second, subtle, almost nothing, but enough. Daniel noticed, because Marines notice things, even when they're tired, even when they'd rather not care. He took a few more steps in, each one cautious, like approaching something fragile or dangerous, or both. The boards groaned under his weight, the air thick with the faint scent of rust, and something older, something buried in the bones of the place. He crouched slightly, eyes narrowing, following the line of the dog's gaze. The floor beneath the bed looked ordinary at first. Glance, scuffed, worn, just another patch of wood in a house full of them. But there was a faint difference, a subtle shift in color, like it had been disturbed once, and then forced back into silence. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, not exactly. More like a pull, the kind you don't question, the kind that leads you somewhere you didn't plan to go. The dog lifted its head just an inch, enough to meet his eyes now. And in that moment, there was something there, something unspoken but clear as daylight. Not a warning, not a threat, but an invitation, quiet and steady, as if to say, "You're here now, so finish what was started." Daniel did not reach for the floor right away, not because he did not see it, but because something in him understood that whatever rested beneath that bed had waited longer than a single moment, and rushing it would feel like breaking a silence that deserved respect. So instead he straightened slowly and glanced around the room again, taking in the peeling paint, the faint outline of where pictures once hung, the quiet weight of a life that had ended without ceremony. The dog remained still, but alert, its ears shifting slightly at every movement he made, tracking him, measuring him, not with suspicion anymore, but with something closer to expectation, as if it had seen men come and go before and was deciding whether he was the kind who stayed. Daniel moved toward the kitchen, each step deliberate, boots brushing against grit and time. He found a faucet that coughed before giving a thin stream of water, filled a chipped bowl, and brought it back, placing it a few feet from the dog. "You should drink," he said softly, voice steady but low, the kind of tone used in places where loud words did not belong. The German shepherd did not move at first, then slowly, carefully, it rose, muscles stiff but controlled, and walked to the bowl, its nails clicking faintly against the wood. It drank without looking at him, but the tension in its body eased just enough to matter. Daniel watched, arms resting loosely at his sides, and for the first time since stepping into the house, something inside him shifted, not hope exactly, but the absence of emptiness, subtle, like the first warmth after a long cold. When the dog finished, it did not return to the center of the room. Instead, it walked back to the bed and lowered itself again, this time placing one paw lightly over the edge of the worn cushion, pressing down. Just once, then still, Daniel exhaled through his nose, a quiet understanding forming. He stepped closer now, slower than before, crouching near the edge of the bed, close enough to see the fine scratches in the wood. Beneath it, marks that were not random, not the careless wear of time, but repeated, intentional, always in the same place. He reached out, hesitated, then pressed his fingers lightly against the floorboard. It felt different, just as he thought, not loose, but not fixed either, like something that had been opened and closed more than once. He glanced at the dog, and this time the animal met his gaze fully. No hesitation, no doubt, just a steady, unwavering look that carried something heavier than instinct, something earned, something remembered. Daniel swallowed once, the quiet of the room pressing in around them. Then he shifted his weight and slid his fingers along the seam of the board, searching for an edge, a gap, anything that would give. The wood resisted at first, stubborn with age, but then there was a faint click, almost too soft to hear, and the board lifted just slightly, enough to reveal a darkness beneath that did not belong to shadows alone. Daniel paused, his breath held without realizing it. The dog did not move, did not make a sound, but its eyes did not leave him, and in that stillness, Daniel understood something he could not explain. This was not just about what was hidden, it was about who had trusted it to be found. The gap beneath the floorboard seemed to breathe, not in motion but in presence, like something that had been sealed away not to be forgotten, but to be found by the right hands. And Daniel felt it in the way his fingers hesitated just above the opening, not out of fear, but out of respect for whatever story had been waiting in that dark space. He shifted his weight slightly and lifted the board higher, the wood giving with a quiet creak that echoed softly through the empty house, and beneath it, tucked carefully into the hollow, was a small metal box, worn at the edges, its surface dulled by time but not abandoned, not neglected, placed there with intention. Daniel reached down slowly, brushing away a thin layer of dust, his fingertips tracing the cool surface as if confirming it was real. The dog behind him remained silent, but he could feel its attention, steady and unwavering, like a witness to something long overdue. He lifted the box carefully, surprised by the weight of it, heavier than it looked, not just in pounds but in meaning. Something about it settled deep in his chest, the kind of feeling that does not come from objects alone. He set it gently on the floor beside the bed and sat back on his heels, studying it for a moment. There was no lock, only a simple clasp, slightly tarnished but intact, as if whoever placed it there never meant to keep it sealed forever, just hidden until the right moment arrived. Daniel exhaled slowly, his thumb brushing against the edge of the clasp, and for a brief second, the world outside the house seemed to fall away. No noise, no past, no future, just this quiet room and the presence of something waiting to be understood. He opened it, the lid lifting with a soft metallic sigh, and inside, neatly arranged despite the years, were items that did not belong to chance. A set of worn military dog tags rested on top, their chain coiled carefully, as if placed with deliberate hands, the metal catching a faint sliver of light from the window. Daniel's breath caught slightly as he picked them up, the weight familiar, the sound unmistakable, a name etched into the surface, not his, but close enough to feel like it could have been. Beneath the tags lay a folded photograph, edges curled but preserved. He unfolded it gently, revealing an image of a man in uniform standing beside a German shepherd, younger, proud, the kind of bond that did not need explanation. Daniel's eyes flicked instinctively toward the dog in the room, and for a moment, the past and present blurred together. The resemblance was undeniable, not just in the markings, but in the posture, the quiet strength, the way the dog carried itself like it remembered something more than commands, something deeper. Daniel swallowed, setting the photograph down carefully, his hands moving slower now, more deliberate, as if each item demanded its own moment. Beneath the photo were documents, neatly stacked, tied with a thin, faded string, official papers, stamped and signed, their edges yellowed but intact. He did not read them yet, not fully, but he saw enough to understand that this was not random, not forgotten. This was protected, preserved, and hidden for a reason. And as he sat there, the box opened before him, the dog watching quietly at his side. Daniel felt something shift again, stronger this time, not just the absence of emptiness, but the presence of purpose, as if whatever had been buried here was never meant to stay lost, only waiting for someone who would finally see it for what it truly was. Daniel did not rush to read the documents, not because he lacked curiosity, but because something in him understood that once he started, there would be no going back to the quiet uncertainty that had filled the room before, and that kind of knowing carried weight, the kind that changed a man whether he was ready or not. He sat there for a moment longer, the open box resting between him and the dog, the faint light from the window catching the edges of the papers as if urging them forward into the present. The German Shepherd shifted slightly, adjusting its position but never breaking focus, its presence steady, grounding, like it had done this before, like it had waited through days and nights for someone to finally sit where Daniel now sat. He reached for the stack of documents and carefully untied the faded string, the fibers resisting slightly before giving way, as if reluctant to release what they had protected for so long. The top page was a formal letter, typed, official, the kind that carried authority without raising its voice. Daniel's eyes moved slowly across the lines, taking in each word, each detail, and with every sentence, the air in the room seemed to grow heavier, not with fear, but with truth. The name on the document matched the one on the dog tags, a staff sergeant, a Marine like him. The letter spoke of assets, holdings, property that had never been claimed, accounts left untouched, all tied to a case that had quietly closed without resolution. Daniel's brow tightened slightly, his mind beginning to connect pieces that were not meant to be obvious. Not at first. He turned the page, then another, each one revealing more, not just numbers, but intent. Instructions written in careful, deliberate language. There were references to a transfer that never completed, to a trust that had been established but never accessed, and at the center of it all was a single condition, one that made Daniel pause, his fingers tightening just slightly on the edge of the paper. The condition was not about paperwork, not about signatures or dates. It was about proof of connection, proof that whoever found this was not just someone who stumbled upon it, but someone chosen, someone recognized. Daniel lowered the paper slowly, his gaze drifting toward the dog, and in that moment, the realization did not arrive all at once. It unfolded, quiet and certain. The dog was not guarding a place. It was guarding a purpose, a link between what had been lost and what was meant to be found. He let out a slow breath, the kind that carried more than air, and looked back down at the documents, this time with a different understanding. This was not just about money, though the numbers hinted at something far greater than he had ever imagined. This was about a man who had known something was wrong, who had prepared for it in the only way he could, leaving behind a trail that could not be erased, only hidden, and trusted to the one thing that would never betray him. Daniel's hand moved to the photograph again, his thumb brushing lightly over the image of the Marine and his dog, and for a brief second, the distance between them felt smaller, like two lives separated by time, but connected by something deeper than circumstance. The German Shepherd rose slowly and stepped closer, stopping just beside him, close enough that Daniel could feel the warmth of its presence, and without thinking, he reached out, his hand resting gently against the dog's neck, the fur coarse but steady beneath his fingers. The dog did not pull away, did not hesitate. It simply stood there, accepting, and in that quiet contact, Daniel understood something he had not expected to find in a place like this. He was not alone in this story, and whatever came next, it had already begun long before he walked through that door. The room no longer felt abandoned, not in the way it had when Daniel first stepped inside, because now it held something that refused to stay buried, something that had begun to speak without words, and Daniel could feel it in the quiet tension that settled into his chest as he gathered the documents once more, this time reading slower, deeper, allowing each line to unfold with its full weight. The numbers were not small, not even close. They stretched into figures that did not belong to men. Like him, accounts tied to land, investments left untouched, all carefully cataloged and yet deliberately hidden, not lost, not forgotten, just waiting, always waiting. And as he turned another page, his eyes caught a name that did not match the others, not the Marine, not any official, but someone else, someone who appeared repeatedly, referenced in margins, tied to transactions that never completed, a civilian name, polished and clean, the kind that belonged to boardrooms and quiet deals. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. The instinct was immediate, not suspicion, but recognition, the kind that came from years of seeing patterns where others saw coincidence. He glanced toward the dog, who had not moved far, still close enough to feel like a presence rather than just an animal. Its ears flicked once, as if sensing the shift in him. Daniel leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly, his gaze drifting toward the window where the fading light now carried a colder tone, evening settling in. And with it, a sense that whatever had been hidden was not meant to stay quiet forever. He looked back at the photograph again, studying the face of the Marine more carefully this time. The posture, the calm confidence, the same quiet strength he had seen in men who carried more than they said. And beside him, the dog, younger but unmistakable, the same eyes, the same unwavering presence. Daniel ran a hand across his face, the weight of it all beginning to settle in a way that felt different from anything he had carried before. This was not just about survival, not about scraping by or finding the next place to sleep. This was something that reached beyond him, beyond the small life he had been living. And for a moment, doubt crept in, quiet but persistent, the kind that asked whether he was meant to be here at all, whether this was a mistake waiting to happen, whether someone else would come knocking, someone who knew more, who wanted what had been left behind. The thought lingered just long enough to matter, and then it passed, not because it was answered, but because something stronger took its place. Daniel lowered the documents carefully back into the box, not closing it, just resting his hands on either side of it as he looked down. The silence of the room no longer empty but full of choices, of consequences, of a story that had not ended. The dog stepped closer again, this time without hesitation, and gently pressed its head against his arm, the contact steady, grounding, and in that simple gesture, Daniel felt something settle inside him. Not certainty, not yet, but direction, the kind that does not need words. He reached down and rested his hand against the dog's neck again, fingers threading lightly through the fur. And this time, there was no hesitation from either of them. Just a quiet understanding forming in the space between man and animal, as if whatever had been left behind was not just meant to be found, but to be carried forward. And as the last light of the day slipped through the window and stretched across the worn floorboards, Daniel knew one thing with a clarity he had not felt in a long time. This was no longer just a place to stay. It was a beginning he did not see coming, but one he could no longer walk away from. The night settled in quietly, not with darkness alone, but with a stillness that seemed to listen, as if the house itself had been waiting for this moment to breathe again. And Daniel sat there longer than he realized, the open box still resting between him and the dog, the faint hum of distant wind brushing against the siding the only sound breaking the silence, until something shifted, not inside the room, but beyond it, a subtle crunch of gravel outside, soft but unmistakable, the kind of sound that did not belong to memory or imagination. Daniel's head lifted slightly, his body responding before his thoughts could catch up, the instincts he had learned long ago rising without effort, quiet, controlled, aware. The dog reacted too, not with panic, not with noise, but with precision, its ears rising, body tensing just enough to signal that something had changed. Daniel slowly closed the lid of the box, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Whatever this was, it was no longer just his discovery. He stood, moving toward the window with measured steps, careful not to disturb the floorboards more than necessary. The faint glow of headlights flickered through the broken blinds for just a second before cutting off, leaving only shadows again. Daniel narrowed his eyes slightly, his reflection faint in the glass, blending with the darkness outside. He did not rush to the door, did not call out. He simply watched, listening, the seconds stretching thin, until a shape moved near the edge of the yard, barely visible, someone standing still, as if deciding whether to approach or turn away. The dog stepped closer to Daniel now, positioning itself beside him, not in front, not behind, but aligned, as if they were already something more than strangers sharing a space. Daniel exhaled slowly, his voice low when he finally spoke, not loud enough to carry far, but enough to break the silence inside the house. "You picked a late hour to visit," he said, the words steady, without edge, just acknowledgement. The figure outside shifted slightly, then began to walk forward, slow, deliberate steps that matched the quiet tension in the air. And as the person came closer, the faint light from the porch revealed more. A man, well dressed despite the hour, posture composed, movements controlled, the kind of presence that did not belong to this place, not to this house or the worn edges of its past. Daniel did not move from the window, but his focus sharpened, the name from the documents surfacing in his mind without effort, not because he wanted it to, but because it fit too well to ignore. The man stopped a few feet from the door, not knocking, not yet, just standing there as if he already knew what waited inside. And in that moment, the quiet certainty that had begun to form in Daniel settled into something stronger, something that carried weight and direction. The dog remained still at his side, its gaze fixed, forward, unflinching, and Daniel understood without needing proof. Whatever had been hidden beneath that floor was never meant to stay buried forever, and whoever stood outside that door had come not by accident, but because the past does not disappear. It waits, it watches, and eventually, it returns for what it believes still belongs to it. Daniel did not open the door right away, not because he was afraid, but because he understood that some moments, once crossed, could not be undone, and the man standing outside did not feel like a stranger arriving by chance. He felt like a question that had finally come looking for its answer. The dog beside him remained still, its presence steady, not tense but alert in a way that carried quiet certainty. Daniel turned slightly, his hand brushing once against the edge of the table where the metal box now rested closed, as if grounding himself in the truth he had already uncovered. Then he stepped toward the door, each movement measured, controlled, the old wood creaking softly beneath his boots. When he reached for the handle, he paused for just a second, not hesitating, just acknowledging the weight of what stood on the other side. Then he opened it, the cool night air slipping in first, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and distant pavement. The man outside stood composed, hands relaxed at his sides, his expression calm but not warm, the kind of face that had learned how to conceal more than it revealed. His suit was clean, pressed, untouched by the wear of places like this, and his eyes moved past Daniel almost immediately, scanning the interior with a quiet familiarity that did not need permission. I was beginning to wonder how long it would take, the man said, his voice smooth, controlled, the tone of someone who had rehearsed patience. Daniel leaned slightly against the doorframe, not blocking the view, but not inviting it either. "You are late," Daniel replied, his voice even, carrying no challenge, just observation. The man allowed a faint smile, one that did not reach his eyes. "No," he said softly. "I arrived exactly when I needed to." His gaze shifted then, lowering just slightly, not to Daniel's hands, not to the room, but to the space near the floor, near the place where the bed stood, where the truth had been hidden for longer than either of them would admit. And in that subtle glance, Daniel saw it clearly, confirmation without words, the name from the documents no longer just ink on paper, but standing here in flesh and breath. The man took a small step forward, stopping just short of crossing the threshold, as if respecting a line he did not fully believe in. "That house," he continued, his tone still calm, "was never meant to be yours." Daniel did not move, did not react. He simply watched, listening not just to the words but to what lay beneath them. "And yet here you are," the man added, tilting his head slightly, studying him now with more direct interest. "That tells me you have already found something." The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with understanding. Daniel did not confirm it, did not deny it. He simply shifted his weight slightly, enough to remind himself where he stood. The dog stepped forward then, just half a pace, enough to be seen fully in the doorway, its posture calm but unyielding, its gaze locked onto the man with a stillness that carried history. The man's expression changed, only slightly, but enough to notice, recognition flickering across his features before being carefully buried again. "That dog," he said quietly, almost to himself, "was always more trouble than expected." Daniel's eyes narrowed just a fraction, not in anger, but in clarity, and for the first time since opening the door, he spoke with something firmer beneath his voice. "It is not trouble," he said. "It is the only reason any of this is still here." The man's faint smile returned, thinner now, less certain, and in that moment, the balance shifted, not in force, not in noise, but in truth, the kind that does not need to be proven because it stands on its own. And as the night settled deeper around them, one thing became unmistakably clear: This was no longer just about what had been hidden, it was about who had the right to carry it forward. And neither man intended to walk away without claiming that answer. The man did not step inside, not yet, but the way he stood there suggested he already believed he belonged. Like the distance between the porch and the living room was nothing more than a formality waiting to be erased. Daniel remained where he was, one hand resting loosely against the doorframe, the other at his side, steady, grounded, and the dog stood beside him, silent but present in a way that filled the space more than any words could. The night air carried a faint chill now, brushing past them both, but neither moved to close the door, because something about this moment demanded it remain open, exposed, honest in a way that neither man could avoid. "You read the documents," the man said finally, not a question, but a conclusion drawn from experience. Daniel did not answer immediately, his gaze steady, measuring, not just the words but the intent behind them. "I read enough," he replied after a moment, his voice calm, without urgency. The man nodded slightly, as if confirming something he had already expected. "Then you understand what is at stake," he said, his tone still even, but carrying a subtle edge now, not aggression, but pressure, the kind that builds without raising its voice. Daniel shifted his weight just slightly, the floor creaking beneath him, not as a distraction, but as a reminder of where he stood. "I understand that it was hidden for a reason," he said, choosing each word carefully. The man's eyes flickered briefly, a reaction too small to mask completely. "Hidden," he repeated, almost thoughtfully. "Or protected." Daniel did not respond to that, because the difference between those two words was not something that needed to be argued. It was something that had already been decided. Long before either of them arrived here, the dog moved then, just a step forward, its body aligning more clearly between Daniel and the man, not in threat, not in aggression, but in presence, a line drawn without force. The man's gaze dropped to the animal again, lingering longer this time, and when he looked back up, there was something else in his expression now, something quieter, more complicated. He was loyal to a fault, the man said, his voice softer, almost reflective, even when it stopped making sense. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in understanding, because loyalty like that was not something you dismissed, it was something you recognized, even if you did not deserve it. "That is not a fault," Daniel replied, his voice steady, and for the first time, there was something beneath it that did not belong to uncertainty. The man let out a faint breath, almost a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You think this is about loyalty," he said, shaking his head just slightly. "It is about ownership." The words settled into the air heavier than anything else that had been said, and Daniel felt it, not as a challenge, but as a test, because ownership was not something he had ever claimed easily, not of things, not of places, not even of his own past sometimes. But this was different. This was not something he had taken. It was something that had been left, entrusted, carried forward through silence and time until it reached him, and that changed everything. Daniel straightened just slightly, not in defiance, but in clarity. "Then you should already know," he said quietly. "It was never yours to begin with." The silence that followed was deeper now, not empty, but full of truth that could not be undone. The man's expression stilled, the faint composure he had carried beginning to shift, not breaking, but adjusting, recalculating. And for the first time since he arrived, he did not step forward, did not speak immediately, because something in the room had changed, something that did not belong to power or control, but to something quieter, something that could not be negotiated. And as the dog remained where it stood, unwavering, and Daniel held his ground without raising his voice, it became clear that whatever had been hidden beneath that floor was no longer just a secret. It had become a choice, and only one of them had been chosen to carry it. The silence did not break. It softened, like something heavy finally being set down after being carried too long. And the man outside the door held Daniel's gaze for a moment longer before shifting his eyes, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement, the kind that comes when a truth cannot be argued without losing something more important than pride. The night air moved between them again, quieter now, less tense, and the man straightened slightly, adjusting his coat, as if returning to a version of himself that no longer fully fit the moment. "You do not understand what you are walking into," he said. Though his voice had lost the certainty it carried before, Daniel did not respond immediately, because understanding was not something that arrived all at once. It came in pieces, in choices, in the way a man decided to stand when things were unclear, and right now, standing was enough. The dog remained beside him, steady, unshaken, its presence no longer just watchful but settled, as if the waiting it had carried for so long had finally reached its end. The man took a small step back from the door, not retreating, just creating space, his eyes drifting once more toward the interior of the house, toward the place where the past had been hidden, and for a brief second, something in his expression softened, not regret, not quite, but recognition of something he had never truly possessed. He believed in things like this. The man said quietly, more to himself than to Daniel, in loyalty, in trust, in leaving something behind that meant more than numbers. Daniel followed the direction of his gaze without moving his head, his voice low when he spoke. He was not wrong. The man gave a faint nod, slow, deliberate, as if agreeing cost him something. Then he looked back at Daniel, meeting his eyes fully this time. "Then take it," he said, the words simple, but carrying weight. "All of it, the accounts, the land. Whatever is tied to that box." He paused, just long enough to let the offer settle. "But understand this, it will follow you, not as a burden, but as a responsibility." Daniel did not answer right away, because he knew that already, not from the documents, not from the man standing in front of him, but from the way the dog had waited, from the way the box had been placed, from the way the past had reached forward instead of fading away. He stepped back slightly from the doorway, not closing it, just shifting the space between them. "I am not taking it," he said finally, his voice calm, steady. "I am carrying it forward." The distinction hung in the air, quiet but undeniable. The man studied him for a moment longer, then gave a small nod, the kind that did not need agreement to exist, and without another word, he turned, walking back toward the darkness where his car waited, his steps measured, unhurried, until the faint sound of a door closing and an engine starting marked the end of his presence. The headlights returned, briefly, sweeping across the yard before disappearing down the road, leaving the house in silence once more. Daniel stood there for a moment, the open doorway framing the night, then slowly closed the door, the latch settling with a soft click that felt final in a way nothing else had. He turned back toward the room, toward the worn floor, the box, the life that had been waiting. The dog moved first this time, walking ahead of him, returning to the bed but not lying down, instead standing there, looking back at him as if to say the waiting was over. Daniel stepped forward, the weight of everything no longer pressing down, but settling into place, and when he knelt beside the dog once more, resting his hand gently against its neck, there was no hesitation left, no question about what came next, because some stories do not end when the truth is found. They begin when someone chooses to honor it. And in the quiet of that old house, with nothing but the sound of his own breath and the steady presence of the one who had never left, Daniel finally understood that what was worth the most had never been hidden in the box at all. It had been waiting beside it the entire time. In this deeply emotional and cinematic journey, a former U.S. Marine steps into a forgotten house carrying nothing but quiet scars and finds himself drawn into a mystery guarded by a loyal German shepherd who refuses to abandon what was left behind. What begins as a simple discovery beneath an old dog's bed slowly unfolds into one of the most powerful animal stories where loyalty becomes the key to truth and silence speaks louder than words. As the Marine uncovers a hidden box filled with dog tags, documents, and a past that refuses to fade, he realizes this is not just about lost wealth, but about a legacy protected through time by a bond stronger than fear. The German shepherd does not guide with commands, but with presence, becoming the living bridge between a fallen Marine's final act and the man chosen to carry it forward, making this one of the most unforgettable animal stories where trust is not given but proven. When a well-dressed stranger arrives under the cover of night, claiming ownership over what was hidden, the story shifts from mystery to moral reckoning, revealing that true ownership is not about possession but about purpose. And in this moment, the Marine and the dog stand together not as strangers, but as guardians of something sacred. Through quiet tension and powerful restraint, this narrative captures the essence of animal stories that go beyond companionship and step into something spiritual, where loyalty becomes truth and truth becomes justice. The hidden fortune is only a surface revelation, because what truly matters is the unseen promise carried by the dog who never left, never forgot, and never failed the one who trusted him, elevating this into one of the most meaningful animal stories that explores grief, redemption, and the invisible thread between past and present, as the confrontation resolves without violence, but with undeniable clarity. The Marine chooses not to claim the wealth as his own, but to honor it, to carry it forward in a way that reflects the integrity of the one who came before him, reinforcing why the most powerful animal stories are not about money but about meaning. In the end, the German Shepherd does not celebrate, does not demand, but simply stands beside the man who finally understood, completing a journey that proves some truths are never buried, only waiting, and that among all animal stories, the ones that stay with us are those where love, loyalty, and quiet grace speak louder than anything else.